Yeah, hello everybody. We're back. I'm back with Chad McBain, my brother. I'm Luke McBain. Together, we're two brothers in Bitcoin. Hi, Chad. How are you? We
I'm
just
good.
had
How are you?
great. Excited. And yeah, we have some. We're just gonna jump right into the article. I think because otherwise, if we start talking about recent events and especially the elections, we won't stop talking. And therefore, I'm going to try to immediately jump into the news which you brought us, the Bitcoin news, and we'll take it from there. Again, we're not giving any financial advice. We always say that, but sometimes we also talk about the price. And here we see Bitcoin touches record high above $93,000 on optimism around Trump's pro-crypto promises. So we had elections. We did also a segment before the elections and said, well, how are the elections going to affect Bitcoin and policies around Bitcoin? And now Trump got elected, and immediately the price jumped. We see here a little bit running up to the elections. We saw that the price already had gone up, but then we go to, yeah, here's election date, November 5th. And after he got elected, immediately, so like we see this huge jump in
Right.
price. Some, I would say, enthusiasm and a little hype. Is this already a rally? What's going on? I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I think there's a couple things going on, and like you said, this is not financial advice, but based on history or historical data, this is about the time that Bitcoin would start to make a move anyway, about 6 months after the halving, any halving that Bitcoin's ever had. So I think we're heading into that time of the market anyway. With that said, as we discussed on our previous recording, um, we kind of talked about the pros and cons of the policies brought forth, or at least the policies that were talked about from the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign. And as you stated, neither of us are Americans, neither of us have a vote in America, so we have no real dog in that fight. We were just looking at, from a policy perspective, what we thought of the policies and which one would be more beneficial to Bitcoin. My conclusion at the end of our discussion was that um, the Republican Party and the Trump campaign's policies, excuse me, were probably more immediately beneficial for Bitcoin, although I would say that the Democrats and Harris certainly seem to be open to the idea of AI and cryptocurrencies moving forward, but they were pretty vague on what their plans were. So I think the market, based on what has happened, is showing us that they felt very good, at least in terms of investment, investing in Bitcoin with the Republicans winning a pretty solid win, I guess you'd call it. Um, with the House and the Senate as well, they can pass legislation without too much trouble. And so I think investors were just looking at this and saying, okay, Bitcoin, based on what Trump had said on the campaign trail, and some other Republicans as well, is going to do well with this administration. And so we see the immediate jump on the 5th and the 6th from roughly 67,000 up to around 70. And then over the next, 10 days, it got as high as 93,000. We're currently recording this on November 16th, and right now it's just below 91,000. I think it's 90,700. So, um, yeah, a tremendous jump. All-time highs were set pretty much every day over the last week and a half. Um, because Bitcoin had never been over 74,000 before, and we've far exceeded that. And we're currently sitting at around 90, and we've been around 90 now for several days. I'm not sure how many, but probably at least four. So it seems to be settling in right now at around that, and then we'll see what happens throughout the rest of November and December to close out the year.
Yeah, I'll get back to the question of the halving because that was another question I had. I mean, here in the article, there is also a couple of interesting statements. Let me go down here. So this article, I think this is yahoo.com, writes, we continue to view crypto assets as a speculative trade rather than a strategic investment portfolio. UBS Global Wealth Management Chief Investment Officer, uh, America's Solita Marcelli said in a note on Tuesday, and it goes on. So all the skepticism is voiced again. We are skeptical that crypto assets can make significant inroads in meaningful and disruptive real-world use, and they can significantly raise a portfolio's volatility, he added. So I don't know if UBS Global Wealth Management, if they actually have an ETF, Bitcoin ETF. It doesn't sound
No,
like it. Maybe that's so
yeah,
you're saying no, they don't. Okay, so that
no,
could already be the background again why they
sure.
are here less encouraging. And but here's an interesting point. And I think it's a good point to make also in terms of the halving and as you say, 6 months after halving, we usually also see some sort of bull run. The firm highlighted that since 2014, there have been three major drawdowns surpassing 70% in Bitcoin, from which has taken an average of 3 years to recover. And I mean, he's not, well, is he making the point? Is Yahoo making the point? It's not quite clear. But yeah, that is a good point to make. I mean, yes, if we move now into another hype phase, there could be another drawdown of 70%, and so that's also always part of the story, right?
Yeah. So I guess I would comment a couple comments on that. So number one, you're right. UBS does not have a Bitcoin ETF. So if you look at companies that are much bigger in the financial world, like BlackRock or Fidelity, in terms of their global wealth management, they're number one and number two in the world with approximately 10 trillion and $5 trillion under management, respectively. Both of them have Bitcoin ETFs. So they're their investment officers will be saying different things than somebody who doesn't. And I think, anybody listening can decide for themselves that there's probably a bias both on one side and the other. I'll leave it at that. But to the comment about what this Salita Marcelli said, or Marcelli, um, first of all, they're 100% correct. It is volatile. And yes, you can see drawdowns of up to 70%. But again, we talked about this in our last episode. In terms of real world usage, I think a lot of these people commenting from the United States, Canada, Europe, even the UK, they're commenting from a point of privilege. There's plenty of real world usage going on in non-Western countries, in South America, in Africa, I'm sure in Asia as well. So that's that's not really true. It's based on somebody's ignorance, maybe, to how Bitcoin is used globally, outside of their own, bubble, their own country, and probably their own little worldview bubble. The other thing I would comment on is the firm highlighted that since 2014, there have been three major drawdowns surpassing 70%. That is true. But worth noting is, and I just pulled up my AI here. Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin on November 30th, 2013, so basically the end of 2013, early 2014, um, was $947. It ended the year at $318 on December 31st, 2014. So that's a huge drawdown. That's a 70% drawdown from its high in 2013. So is there anybody listening that would be upset with a 70% drawdown in 2013 that 10 years later resulted in 90, so that it was $318, now it's $90,000. Volatility is is what happens when an asset class is growing. And so some people would say, well, that's bad. But I'll take volatility if something goes up, what's that, 10? So 30x. So that's 30 times the price. But every time it goes up, maybe it comes down 70%. Okay. But that's still higher than the previous high. So that's a good thing. So again, This is not investment advice. But if you're going to criticize something for its drawdowns, you also have to point out its increases. And that's where they kind of fail in the article, or not the article, but certainly the quote from the advisor only talks about the bad part, not the good part.
Mhm.
So,
So it's not very, it's not like a very balanced statement. And yeah, thanks for pointing that out. That also, I mean, you always have to look at the source and the bias of the source, and then go like, yeah, how balanced is actually the statement? Does it point out the negatives, but also put it perhaps the negatives into the context?
right.
And the other way around, also point out basically the benefits, but also then give us the context of maybe negative aspects. And yes, as you say, real world cases. Again, I mean, one day maybe we'll do an episode of the number of people which still are unbanked in the world. Like we all have our bank accounts, we have our methods of payment, transact. We have even maybe several options how to transact with each other and how to send money. And some people they have none of these things. They don't have a bank
Yeah.
account even. And so how are they going to, apart
Right.
from using cash, how are they going to do that? And here there's real world possibilities if the cost of transactions go down over time, which they will. I'm pretty certain of that. I just want to move on to a second article, which is a little bit more detailed about the analysis. About why maybe we saw some surge in the price or a significant surge. Here, this person recommends something. Again, we don't recommend any investment or anything in this podcast. So this is just an article. Bernstein recommends quick crypto investment post-Trump, predicts 200K Bitcoin. I mean, these predictions always are floated a lot, right? It's going to go to 100,000. It's going to go to the moon. It's going to go to here. You always have to take that with a grain of salt. Will it really go to,
Mhm.
who knows if that's going to happen? There's somebody apparently very enthusiastic. These are some from, so it's like a firm which is doing like investment analysis. So, but what is interesting here is why is this now happening? I mean, you already mentioned this Trump victory could lead to more accommodating regulatory environment for cryptocurrencies. And here there is apparently this company has confidence in Bitcoin for a bullish trajectory, but we'll get to this bullishness in a moment also. Increased institutional adoption. We always talk about that there is likely that more institutions are going to invest in Bitcoin, supporting the steady upward price trend. Growing demand for digital assets, sort of like the opposite of the previous article which states there's no real world usage for this. He writes, as Bitcoin reaches new highs, more investors are likely to view it as a long-term store of value. Um, yeah, they point Bitcoin's appeal as an inflation hedge. We talk about that a lot, and a potential alternative to traditional assets like gold. And then macro factors, economic uncertainty with inflation concerns and potential economic turbulence, Bitcoin's limited supply, and so on would be like a security against fiat currency devaluation.
Right.
Okay, so that's basically their three statements, including the improved regulatory environment for cryptocurrency. And we don't know if that's going to happen, but maybe that's part of the hype. Trump saying, well, actually, the US Treasury should hold Bitcoin, at least 1 million Bitcoin. You said that in our last, I mean, that's another thing which probably drives this
Sure. Yeah.
small hype. Yeah.
Yeah, I think look, personally, I'm not going to hold my breath on Bitcoin being used as a reserve asset for the United States in the next 2 or 3 years. Um, so I think that's a lot of hyperbole. That was discussed. He did talk about it on the campaign trail, so fair enough. But that has to get by the Senate and Congress as well. So I don't know about that. What I do believe, however, is the antagonistic approach that the previous administration, or actually the current administration, um, has taken towards Bitcoin and crypto at large. I think that's going to slow down, if not stop completely. I think Bitcoin has already proven in the last year, particularly with the 11 ETFs, that institutions and certainly investors want it. And so it's legal from that perspective. It's just traded like an asset. or any commodity. But the crypto industry at large probably benefits a little bit more from a lack of hostility towards it. But what that does for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's kind of the leading horse or the fastest horse in that race, I think people look at Bitcoin as a proxy for the entire crypto market. And so if there's going to be less hostility towards the crypto market, that has to be good for Bitcoin. And then, of course, as Bitcoin gets more investment, the price goes up, and then the crypto market itself starts to rise with Bitcoin. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy almost. But I think that the administration, that the incoming administration, will be much more friendly to Bitcoin for sure, and probably friendly to the crypto market at large, or friendlier. Um, and therefore, yeah, I think there's a lot of people that might have been sitting on the sidelines, a lot of money managers, probably hedge funds, private investors that were kind of looking at that saying, okay, we know that the incoming administration is very pro Bitcoin. I now feel much more at ease with investing in this asset class because I know that the government the incoming government is okay with that and supports that and will put in more guardrails to protect me and my assets and my investments and that kind of stuff, which is all really that most people in the industry have asked for. But for whatever reason, the Biden administration um, didn't seem all that interested in that. And I'm going to separate Kamala Harris from the Biden administration just a little bit because on the campaign trail, her comments seem more open to helping developing technologies, AI, Bitcoin, that kind of stuff. So the Biden administration seems to have had a different take on it than maybe she did herself. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, when you say to have more regulatory security when investing into Bitcoin, I think that's a good point, and it just raises another piece of news which I just remember, which we had, which is this one here. We talked like this says Italy considers raising capital gains tax on Bitcoin to 42% from 26%. And I mean, this kind of, this, and you're chuckling, I know why. I mean, and this also is, of course, some form of insecurity for investors because, well, am I going to be taxed to death on Bitcoin? What's going to happen here? How will this compare then to other investments which I have? I guess that's part of the story when we talk about regulatory security to know what am I dealing with here? And if something like this is doubling, like almost, yeah, almost doubling, not quite the tax rate. We talked about this, I think it was like a white paper by the European Central Bank where this was even recommended, and this came out, I think, almost at the same time in October. Yeah, so that could be part of the story. There's just a lot of insecurity about that. How our government's going to regulate that space.
Yeah, I think, I guess there's two ways you can look at that. One, I think that there's definitely fear, clearly, amongst the European central banks about Bitcoin, and could it somehow supplant, in their case, the euro? So I think that's part of where that comes from. But I also think there's another way to look at that, which is they're seeing that more and more investment money is going into Bitcoin, and typical of all governments, they don't want to miss out on getting a piece of that. And so the more popular it becomes, the more they want to tax it, possibly to penalize people and to discourage them from investing in it. And also, if people are going to invest in it anyway, then at least the government wants their share. So, or more than their share in this case. So we'll see what happens. I would point out, however, that that directive was put out in October, long before the U.S. election, with an administration in the U.S. that's probably going to be much more friendly to Bitcoin and even promote Bitcoin and potentially consider it as a slight reserve asset. I think the EU central banks will probably fall in line if that's how the US is going to look at it. I can't imagine that a year from now, if the US is embracing Bitcoin with both arms, that the European Union central banks are going to somehow think it's okay to tax it at 42% any capital gains. It just doesn't make any sense. Every central bank in the Western world is pretty much beholden to the U.S. Fed. So I think whatever the Americans do, everybody else will fall in line. But it might take some time, you know.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens over the next 6 to 12 months. I know currently the European Central Bank is not a fan of Bitcoin, but at the end of the day, as they say, Bitcoin will always win. So if the U.S. starts to embrace it, and we already know that several members of the BRICS nations are certainly in favor of some Bitcoin, I think the EU would have no choice but to eventually follow. Yeah, we will
Let's
we will win peacefully.
Yeah, it seems like it's changing people's minds. Like it's
Yeah,
difficult to change Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is changing people. And we talked about that before, that this is like seems here to stay, and therefore we like probably similar like AI, we have to start changing our thinking about this in some way, or it'll change our
right.
lives in some way. And that seems to be going on. And the especially if you observe this space from a long-term perspective. Yeah, I just want to like we rarely talk about price, but because we talked about price in the beginning of the segment, like this jump, which we saw now, because of the election, the price jump here. I just wanted to, and then this we talked about this article which claims, well, there's always a 70% drawdown. Boy, you got to watch out. That's a lot of money, which you're going to lose. Just wanted to show this chart again where we see a bigger overview over the price development of Bitcoin, where we see these, yeah, the bullish phase and then the bearish phase. Here we see a high, and here we see one, and here's one of those drawdowns of 70%, and probably here also somewhere. I don't know, that's not quite 70%, perhaps there. So yeah, we see here these fluctuations, but there seems to be a long-term trend. And actually, yeah, my question was because you said, well, is this now really because of the election, or is this now, or is this already the expected bull market, or the beginning of the bull market, or the hype? Yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Or are we still, I mean, it's more or less to be expected at this time, but more like also now, last time it was, I think, December, January, it really started to kick off. And
Yeah,
I'm,
I think.
uh,
No, I was just going to say, I think. So if I remember correctly, November of 2020, which was roughly 6 months after the 2020 halving, um, Bitcoin was sitting at around, it was below the previous all-time high. I think it was at around $15,000, $16,000. It finished the year at 30,000. So it doubled from basically November to the end of December. And then continued its run in 2021 up until I think March or April. Anyway, the point I'm making here is, and it did something similar in terms of percentages in 2016 to 17 as well, and also 4 years before that. So I guess the point I'm making is I think election or not, this was the time frame that it was going to start to take off. For those that follow us or know a little bit about Bitcoin, the supply shock from the halving is really starting to be felt 6 months later, no matter what year we're in, as long as it's a halving year. So I think the price was going to go up anyway because there's just less Bitcoin. However, I think a couple of things happened with it becoming part of the US election cycle. I think a lot of people who normally would have been investing in September and October to help see the price increases in November were waiting to see what happened with the election because it became part of the election cycle. Normally, it wouldn't. Like Bitcoin in 2020 was not discussed by the by people running for president of the United States. So I think we're getting a bit of a delayed reaction to what normally would have happened. I think a lot of people in September and October who would have been making investments just waited to see what was going to happen. So this big jump, this is just my opinion, not investment advice, but I think this big jump from 70 to 90 is primarily people that would have been investing a couple of months ago, getting in. To me, this is the price appreciation we were going to see anyway. I think the real question is what happens next. So in my hypothetical little world, Bitcoin, the previous all-time high was 73,000 just before the halving. I think we were going to go to 90 or 100,000 in this cycle, no matter what. Now, you add in the fact that the United States seems to be turning very pro crypto with this next administration. That I don't know what that means, but it's probably positive. So I guess long-winded answer to your question, I think we saw what do you call it? Kind of an elastic rebound in that price happening so quickly from the election. But I also believe that had it not been a part of the election process, I believe we would have seen a more gradual increase and still would have come out to roughly the same number anyway. It wouldn't have happened in that immediate, 1 week. It probably would have happened over the course of a couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's just thank you for this insight. And as we always say, also just looking into like the previous experience price development says nothing but future price development, and so on and so forth. I guess this goes without saying, but what you're suggesting is, yeah, if we look at the last cycle, 1122, we would be here, and we already see this like uptick here, right? From
Yeah,
like we were already above the previous all-time high in November, basically, of 2020, like 4 years ago.
yeah,
And for me, it's just fascinating to see, like, if we can imagine that we sort of, and again, I'm not saying that this is going to happen or this, as we say, like this is just a past pattern. But if we look at this pattern, and if we imagine we are here right now, and then this would continue up like that, then we're here right now.
right,
Then it would continue going up like
right,
there, without knowing exactly if that's going to happen. Could crash down again. We don't know that. But yeah, the patterns are similar. And of course, we again with this drawdown, probably if we have a hype, which will happen also after whatever comes, if this hype comes now or the bull run
sure,
comes, I mean, we also probably have to live with the fact that it will crash down again to the previous high, as last time, maybe not. So it
yeah,
would crash
yeah,
down to here, or maybe up here. Who knows? And
yeah.
that
And I,
would be
and I think that's where some of these price predictions are coming from. I think all these people are doing is looking at this data, and going back to 2013, 2014, and seeing this very similar pattern every time. So when you see predictions of 200 or 220 or 250,000, all they're doing is extrapolating this data to the current price. And then like, well, if it's going to go up 150% or 200% from this point, then you come up with those numbers. Now whether or not it does that, I don't know. But it certainly seems to be what's that saying? History doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes. Well, this chart looks like it's rhyming.
mm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and it also depends, anyway, I think we'll just leave it there because we're also running out of time.
Sure.
Was a really interesting segment. I think we got it sort of like the indications are that these months now are going to be very interesting and pretty exciting in terms of Bitcoin. But to everybody out there, don't get too excited and how
Do
to
your
say
own
it.
research.
Do
Do
your
your
own
own research.
research.
Yeah.
Be responsible for whatever you're doing. Don't get swept away by things like I do sometimes. I get excited about stuff. But we are going to see some very exciting developments in the upcoming months. I think that whatever is going to happen, I think that's going to be true. I'm not talking about the price, but we're looking forward to the next couple of months, and we're going to be back with some
Yeah.
fascinating stuff. That's for sure.
I think you're right. Yeah.
All right. So thanks a lot, Chad. Thanks for bringing that, I think, really important news. And yeah, so talk to you soon.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.